75th district, and the 75th district includes quite a large rural district. My district includes Sussex, Southampton, Brunswick, Greensville, city of Emporia, the city of Franklin, and part of Lunenburg.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Delegate Joshua Cole from the 28th House District. That's part of the city of Fredericksburg and part of Stafford County.
My name is Sally Hudson. I represent Charlottesville and Albemarle in the 57th District.
Delegate Tony Wilt, 26th House District, which is the city of Harrisonburg and a portion of Rockingham County.
Delegate Charlie Poindexter, I represent Franklin County, Patrick County, and Western Henry County, long district up from Smith Mountain Lake up to the Blue Ridge Parkway and up to Maywood Mill.
Good afternoon, I'm Danny Marshall. I represent all of Danville, parts of Pennsylvania, and parts of Henry.
Thank you. And our MVPs, the most valuable people in the room, would you care to?
David Berry, Counsel with Legislative Services.
Barbara T., Clerk with the House Clerk's Office.
Scott Beecham with Legislative Services.
All right, and we couldn't do it without everybody in the room. So we are very, very glad to have the public here to speak to the bills. We will invite you to come to line up and come and sit in this chair and speak to us. We will hopefully be able to hear everything you have to say, but in the interest of time, if things get really long, we may have to ask for a time limit of a couple of minutes each, but hopefully not. I guess with that, we'll get going. There's a lot going on in this building today, so we might as well get started. I do know of one of the bills on our list, HB 1497, has been asked to go by for the week and be introduced at another time. So, do you need a vote on that? Okay, so that's by for the week. We have a sign-up sheet here, and I think all of our patrons are here today. So I would invite Delegate Knight to come and speak to us about HB 119.
Yes, ma'am, on House Bill 119, I have an amendment in the nature of substitute that hopefully clerk has. And Madam Chairman, I would ask you to, if you see fit, to adopt the amendment.
I move substitute.
Second.
All right, so you have a motion to substitute an amendment in the nature of substitute, and it has been moved and seconded. And this is listed. So all in favor say aye. All opposed? Okay, adopted. The amendment is adopted.
I'll tell you what the amendment does really quick, and then I'll get into the substance of the bill, because everyone may have read the bill. The amendment is a enactment clause, and the enactment clause will say if this legislature sees fit to pass this bill, that it won't become effective until 6 months after the enactment if 11 other states that are listed in here adopt similar legislation. This is the milk bill, which I'll get into the nuts and bolts of it, but the substitute just addresses the enactment clause on it. So it's very important to this bill, because if you pass it, it will not become effective, become law until 11 states that are named in here for distribution purposes. And so with that, Madam Chairman, I'll tell you about the bill.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to point out to everyone here that was at line 169, that new part there. Okay. Yes, please do tell us.
What precipitated this bill was I had some legislators from North Carolina and Maryland, two states that have enacted this legislation that talks about milk. And what the bill says is that milk shall only be labeled milk in the state of Virginia if it comes from a hoofed lactating animal. As we certainly know, as a cow, there's some subsets of that, maybe, some other hoofed animals, but for purposes of this, it would be like a cow, because we've got, where agriculture is by far our largest industry in the state of Virginia, we're losing about one dairy farm a week in the state of Virginia. Our agriculture status is suffering in Virginia. I thought this, knowing that it's going to take a while for this to be enacted, would certainly send a wonderful signal to our dairy farmers that we're behind you. We want to help you when we can. The federal government, the Food and Drug Administration, has a, I hate to say a law, but a statement in there as a matter of fact that says milk comes from a hoofed animal. They have yet to enforce that, but that is a federal regulation, if you will. So that's already there in the federal government. If they were to enact that, this could just go away. It would be a moot point because, as you well know, they trump us. So I think it's pretty simple, straightforward. I would like to say that milk comes from a cow as opposed to a plant-based fluid, which we know that we have soy beverage and almond beverage that they like to market on the good name of milk. So that's pretty much about it. And Madam Chairman, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any questions for the delegate?
Don't know this, is a goat, a hoofed animal?
Yes.
Okay.
It's including cattle, water buffalo, sheep, goats, and yaks, deer, reindeer, moose, horses, and donkeys. Now, I'm gonna limit myself to cows. But that is part of the legislation, Attorney Marshall.
I have a question, Mr. Chair. Based on the other states, are they already in the process of introducing legislation?
I'm aware that North Carolina has approved it, and Maryland has approved it, and Delegate Tyler, that's really all I can speak to. I don't know how far along any other states are, but, you know, I see where actually this thing goes away if the 11 states haven't enacted it by October 1 of 2029. So it may be an uphill push to have this happen, but like I said, I think it really does send a wonderful signal to agriculture and to our dairy farmers that we support.
Delegate, I have a question. There are, of course, uses of the word milk traditionally in our language for other than dairy milk, hoofed animal milk, and things like milk of magnesia and and we have body butter and things like this that where we do use words that we usually associate with dairy, but they do exist in other parts of the language. I wonder if there's a way to use the word dairy instead of remove the word milk.
Well, I would like to try to keep uniformity with the other states, to keep with the enactment clause, but I think there may be some people that may get confused when you talk about soy milk and almond milk and dairy milk, but no one's going to get confused when you say milk of magnesia, because we all know what that is.
Right. Any further questions for the delegate? If not, is there anyone here who wants to speak in favor of the bill?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Stephanie Kitchen with Virginia Farm Bureau. I just want to add that the issue of milk labeling is a very real issue for our dairy producers. We have been working on this primarily at the federal level, as Delegate Knight explained very well. This is a federal issue, and FDA has chosen up until this point not to enforce the existing what they call standards of identity for milk and dairy products. There are standards of identity for other food and beverages as well. So it's not a new concept, they just have chosen up until now not to enforce it. And again, as Delegate Knight mentioned, the dairy industry is struggling, particularly in Virginia, where in 2018 we were losing on average 1 dairy farm a week. In 2019 that went up to 2 dairy farms a week. So this is a very real issue for our dairy producers. Getting to the difference between plant-based beverages and actual dairy milk from cows or goats, I think the confusion is not exactly that maybe consumers aren't confused as to what you are getting, but the nutritional value is the different in dairy milk versus that of plant-based beverages. For example, dairy milk has 8 times the amount of protein that almond milk does, and with the struggling times for our dairy industry, we want to make sure that's a level playing field and they're not capitalizing on the good marketing that the dairy industry has. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Kyle Shree with Virginia Agribusiness Council, and also speaking on behalf of our member of the Virginia State Dairymen's Association. We support the bill as well, along the same lines as what Ms. Kitchen just pointed out. We do like to see these things solved at the federal level for labeling. I think the Enactment Clause solves a lot of those concerns, and we'd certainly support the bill. Thank you, Delegate Knight, for putting it in.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, I'm Jim Riddell with Virginia Cattlemen's Association, and we also support the bill, and as well as the Virginia State Dairymen's Association support the bill. 25 years ago, there were 1,650 dairy farms in Virginia. Today, there are 450. And I think most of you know our dairy farmers are real serious farmers. They're family businesses, all of them. As several speakers have alluded to, the economic situation is not good. But our milk producers, our cattle producers support this bill, and we'd like to see it pass. So thank you.
Thank you for coming, sir. Anyone else here to speak in support of the bill? Anyone here to speak in opposition?
Yes. Yeah. Where do I speak? Here?
Just a few steps forward where I can see you.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So, okay. My name's Ann Buteau. I live in Nelson County, and member of Virginia Independent Consumers and Farmers Association. Been coming down here for a number of years. First of all, I want to address the comments that the people just made. The Farm Bureau, talking about everyone, Farm Bureau, dairymen, cattle farmers, everyone talks about how dairy farmers are struggling. Well, in my opinion, it would be better for the efforts to be made to make the middlemen, the people who buy the milk, pay a fair price to the farmers. That would help eliminate, the struggling dairy farmers. As far as the amendment, so I have a whole bunch of points here which I can go through about the actual bill. I understand that liquid milk sales have been falling and there's almond milk and soy milk, but I really don't think people are going to be buying almond milk by mistake, because the consumers who are wanting almond milk and soy milk are specifically looking for different nutritional elements than that is found in dairy milk. So it's not someone buying it by mistake. I'm happy for, almond milk should be called almond beverage or soy beverage. It doesn't have to be called milk. The definition, if this bill was just about defining dairy milk and plant-based beverages, I think you would only have had to insert a definition for milk. The word healthy is not necessary to define milk, because a lacteal secretion is a lacteal secretion, whether it comes from a healthy or an unhealthy animal. It's still lacteal secretions, okay? Or a human being. It's been called milk for hundreds of years, and so I think the definition does not have to have the word healthy, and although I know it has it in the Pastured Milk Ordinance and it possibly has it in the other states. Also, if you had the definition without the word healthy and added and milk is blah 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 and not a plant-based product, you would have what you need. You wouldn't have to then open up other paragraphs in the code to carry on with it. So therefore, in lines 161 to 162, I believe that they are necessary because that's like in the misbranding section, and it says misbranded food, and then it goes a food shall be deemed to be misbranded if its labeling is false or misleading. Well, in line 24 to 26, milk and plant-based beverages are defined as food already. So therefore, if they're already defined as food in here, surely they are covered under 5.2, 3.2 section 3.2 5.1.2.3, where it says if it's labeling as false or misleading in any way, if you labeled an oat beverage as oat milk, it's already covered in the code. And the same with if a product is offered for sale under the name of another food, it's covered. You don't need to have lines 161 and 162. So then, as lines 161 and 162 are unnecessary, lines 98 to 100, I believe, are also unnecessary. So, because why enable the creation of new regulations that are not really necessary or justified? It wastes REDAC's time, it wastes taxpayers' money. So in summary, the bill as it stands, I believe, would just allow REDACs to go wild with the regulations. There's no guidance really, and however they wish, with no limitations. As far as the amendment and substitute, I would say if you haven't seen the other states' bills that have already been passed, how can you vote on this bill because you don't know if that's agreeing with the other bills in the other states? And also, some of us, and lots of people who aren't in this room, oppose this bill. And if you pass this bill, then it's one state closer to the 11 states that need it to happen. And also, the sixth, where's it gone? Okay, I think I've kind of ground to halt there. I think that's pretty much all of my points. So if anyone has questions, I can try and answer them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is anyone else here to speak in opposition?
Hi, I'm Susie Crows, and I am with FICFA as well. I would only like to add one other thing, and that would be in the section that's 98 through 100. What concerns me, just as an average person, is that I feel like this is such an open-ended opportunity for a regulatory system to be set up, and it causes concern for me for herd shares, which they did try to label 2 or 3 years ago, because in that section it doesn't say we want to have this entity work on the nut milk label. It says including the nut milk label. So that just, you know, I'd like to see something a little bit either more concise or stick it on the change the label. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it's necessary. So for those reasons, we oppose the bill. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else in opposition? No? Any further discussion here? Does anyone have?
I can answer some questions based on
Please
the
do, sir.
testimony. Totally agree with the lady when she says that almond ought to be named almond beverage, and that's exactly the term that they call it in Canada. This is where it goes to the word healthy. That is a term of art that we typically use around here because we don't want to say just any lactating animal. We want to say healthy animals. We use that as a term of art around here. And then some of the lines that they were talking about in here that they didn't particularly like are already code. And my bill doesn't address what is already code.
Thank you, Elliot. I have a question. Do we know if some of these almond and soy and oat, is any of that manufactured here in Virginia? Would we be seriously damaging another set of industries by trying to boost this industry?
I couldn't tell you that. I'm not aware of any large almond plantations. It's just not. I'm not aware. There may be some. I'm not aware if there are any large almond plantations in here. We certainly have a lot of soybean, but the biggest one of the biggest exports we got out of Port Virginia is raw soybeans, and then soybean meal and soybean oil. It's a bulk commodity that goes away. I would imagine it would be less than 1/2 of 1% of the soybeans grown in Virginia, so it's statistically not a factor.
I think I feel like we are lacking some information about these other industries and how they might be affected by this.
Well, if you ask me a question, I'll certainly try to answer it on there. You know, I think I did on on soybeans, and you know I'm a farmer, and you know I'm greatly involved with the Port of Virginia. I know our commodities and our exports, so I can state with fact about what percent soy milk would be of the amount of soybeans grown in Virginia. That I can state as fact. I can also just tell you that I'm not aware of any large almond farms in Virginia, and there certainly, if there's an almond farm in Virginia, I'm not aware of it, but if there is, they're statistically insignificant compared to the dairy farms.
Any further questions?
No, make a comment, Madam Chair. I lived in a rural area 12 years ago. I think I represented 142 dairy farms. I'm at 12, 14, 16 now. And the economic importance of those dairy farms is not just in the milk in that farm, but it's all in the communities. And the thing that we have here too is that their associations, most of their dues and things goes to advertising. So there's a heck of a big investment that I'm aware of in the marketing of the product. It's such a basic food, so important to the children as well as the adults around. And I would like us to pass this bill because I think it sends a strong message. I understand there may be some opposition to it, but I'm going to move to support the bill.
Second. All right, we have a
Madam Chair,
motion.
is there further discussion on that?
Is there further discussion?
Yeah, I'm asking. Can we have further discussion on that?
Yes, we certainly can.
Well, thank you. First of all, I apologize for being a little bit late. I had another subcommittee. Have we moved the substitute?
Yes.
So this is as.
And the substitute delegate, it's basically the last paragraph.
And I apologize, Madam Chair, for coming in late. I'm sure you've had this conversation, but maybe I can ask this to council. Is it typical for us to have an enactment clause that is 9 years further into the future than we are today?
Madam Chair, it's not, I wouldn't say it's typical, but it's not unheard of. We do have enactments that are several years out.
Further question, Madam Chair. Is it typical for us to have enactment clauses that refer to conditions of other states adopting, including 11, not just neighboring 1 or 2 states, but 11 states?
Madam Chair, it does happen sometimes, especially with something like an interstate compact or some sort of regional body. It's possible.
One other question. I'm sorry. Again, I apologize for walking in late. And next time, I will definitely be on time. Has there been conversations that I might have missed about what, if any, federal law could impact this versus state by state? And the reason I ask is because if federal law ends up trumping this or possibly preempting it or clarifying it, why is there no reference to federal law preempting this in our code? If we are going to refer to 11 other states, maybe we can add to this, and or if federal law changes that might also implement the same. Would that be something that would be in order?
Madam Chair, would you like me to explain? Yes, as I stated earlier before you got here.
Sorry.
There is a federal section from the Food and Drug Administration federally that has the definition, milk is from a hoofed animal. So it's there. They haven't enforced it yet. We're pushing them to enforce that, Farm Bureau, the dairy industry, everyone. And if, as you well know, if they do enforce it, then federal law trumps state law, so it's no need for our law. But we think that this may encourage them to pass their law.
So we're using our state law to send a message to Congress to do something that or to the federal agencies that we'd like to do. Because I remember there was a time when we used to do memorializing resolutions where we would send to the General Assembly to Congress or budget or constitutional amendments. And I believe that the previous term, the speaker said that we're not doing those types of messaging bills anymore.
Madam Chairman, that was in the Rules Committee, that was in the other one, but you have stated a fact.
Yeah.
Virginians are a hell of a lot smarter than Congress.
All right.
I find the list of states interesting. It all tends to be geographically homogeneous, so
distribution purposes, we thought maybe if there was a warehouse here and they distributed to these particular states, that's why these states are geographically kind of close. You know, we certainly wouldn't want to go grab a state that, you know, wasn't contiguous, if you will.
Thank you. Any further questions, discussion? Do we have a motion?
There's a motion, Pam.
Has been seconded. Are we ready to vote?
Sure.
All right. On your, what am I trying to say here?
We're gonna move
On your
the
electronic
bill.
voting system?
Ooh.
Have the motion. So, members will cast their vote, please. Clerk will close the roll. Thank you, delegate. The bill is reported, what is it, 7-1. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I used to sit in that seat for about 8 years. I was chairman of this committee, but being as you passed my bill, I think you're doing a fine job.
And you're milking compliments out of that.
All right. Who is next on our list here? We have Delegate Guzman here. Yes, she is. All right, Delegate Guzman, with HB 1002.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members of the committee, I bring up to you House Bill 10002. It talks about the Agriculture and Forestry Industry Development Planning Grant Program. This fund law was created in 2012. It's the Agriculture and Forestry Industry Development Fund, and it was created to provide funding to attract new and expanding existing agriculture and forestry processing using Virginia grant projects. Unfortunately, back then, we did not establish the planning grant program, only the facilities part. So what we have been doing for the last years is that we have been including the funding for this program on the budget. So what we wanted to do this year is to put legislation so we could create a grant program where the governor could actually award these grants to different localities and work-based localities. So that this bill would establish that the AFID planning grant program, as part of the AFID fund law, clarify that the governor is authorized to award funds to localities, and these funds be awarded as reimbursable grants to political subdivisions. The Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry will be in charge to develop the guidelines for the AFID planning grant program, and this bill will address the lack of clarity regarding the existing authorization for the allocation of AFID funds. It's important to remember that this program is filling a critical need for localities looking to advance their agriculture and forestry industries and support local producers. In many cases, these localities would not be able to conduct these planning projects without this grant program. Additional, because the locality is required to demonstrate the active participation of the agriculture and forestry community as part of the project development and implementation. So this program will promote greater coordination in between the locality and these communities as to how to best support agriculture and forestry in these localities. And I think that's something that we would love to support, as Virginia is known as #1 in agriculture, and we want to continue that. And I hope this is the pleasure of the committee members and Madam Chair to support this bill.
Thank you, Delegate. Does anyone have questions for the delegate?
I have a question. Doug, if I read your bill right, this is really an expansion of the current grant program to include local government applying for and receiving grants to carry out programs.
I would
The
say
current program stays there, right?
yes, it
You're
does.
adding to it to give grants to local governments.
Yeah, and what happened is that since we don't have a mechanism that actually exists, what we have to do now is deal on one-to-one basis and appropriate that money and the budget. So the money is there. So what we're creating is actually creating a program. So #1, more localities could participate. And then we can work in coordination with the secretary, where they would develop the guidelines, and people, localities would apply with the governor to provide these grants. Yes, sir.
Madam Chair, quick question. Well, there's only so much money in that pot. Are these two types of grants going to the local farmer and the local processor that's trying to set up a creamery or a packaging plant or something, or are they going to be in competition with the local government using its grant for some kind of program that it wishes to push?
So we have staff here right now, because what happened is right now we didn't have, it's a new program, and it's been done on a daily basis, but I'm sure there's a staff here that could answer this question of how that will be addressed, Delegate Poindexter.
Do we have someone here
Yes.
to help?
Yes, Bill Scruggs, Virginia Department of Agriculture, Consumer Services. Currently the aphid development, the aphid fund is currently used both, has been used both for plant grants as well as for what we call infrastructure programs for development of specific projects. So what this essentially does is the authorization for doing that was put through the Appropriation Acts. Okay, so what this does is it codifies it in the event that it's not in the Appropriation Act. It allows us to continue doing it. Localities have indicated in cases where it's been used, I think 40 some cases, basically it has provided a lot of money for feasibility studies, some having to do with the dairy industry projects on a regional basis, as well as some other examples using the fund for basically Clark County was looking at it in terms of economic development, including agriculture development as a part of their program there. And then
Sorry, sir, I can hardly hear you. I'm from Clark County. I would love for you to repeat that.
Okay, it was basically used in Clark County for having to do with basically an economic study to look at the cost of existing land uses and developing an area where total expenditures required by land use could be based upon, balanced with the revenues and the importance of agriculture. Then in Shenandoah County, it was also used in the case of economic development strategy development for the county in terms of including agriculture as a part of that. Part of also what they found was the importance of farmland preservation, these types of programs. But the fiscal impact, the bill does not have a fiscal impact because we currently have the program in place. It's codified that.
Thank you.
Question for the gentleman?
Sure.
You said the bill does not have fiscal impact. Was the amount in the proposed budget increased for the asset program?
No, sir.
So wouldn't we have the competition that I was referring to from local producers? I mean, my experience with the grant has been in actually starting up processing facilities and farmers markets and things. I mean, actually setting up a market, okay, and that kind of thing, instead of a government entity at the local level doing economic feasibility studies. I mean, this has been rubber on the road with people and businesses, but and I'm just alluding to my concern. That's why we set this fund up several years ago, was to actually get some things, some rubber on the road. And I don't know if this would, I hope it would. I don't, that's why I'm asking the question.
That's a very good question. In some cases, it's being used for feasibility studies to actually move to that next step forward with actually funding business ventures.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Chairman? Yeah, so, how much money is in the budget, like last year?
Let me see, I'll double check.
How much?
250,000.
All right, so follow-up question. Of that, how much is, of course, we're only halfway through the year, but how much of it is spent each year? Is it usually a fund balance that's left over, or is it all of it being spent for?
I am not certain of that.
And staff, do you have that information? The information on that? No? Okay. So what I have here is that since the inception of the AFID fund, 83 facility grants have been awarded totaling $6 million. And the project encouraged the creation of 2008 new jobs and 350 full-time employees.
I think you've got a friend behind you.
Yeah.
Get him.
Okay.
All right.
Madam Chairman, if I might, Brad Copenhaver, Deputy Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry.
Thank you.
This is a VDAX agency bill to answer the specific question about spending the fund. In the first 2 years, we were not. Recently, we have been getting very, very close to spending all that money. Actually, in this last year, the rate of awards, we were about a little over 1 per month, which is the fastest of any administration in the history of this program. So this program is on its feet. It's doing what it intended. And to answer your question, Delegate Poindexter, what we're doing with this planning grant language is codifying what the original intent was in the original budget that was passed in 2012. This was part of the program. We've continued to do it with budget language and through a directive from the Secretary of Finance office. So this has always been intended to be a part of the program. Give you another example of one of the projects that we've done with this, talking about the dairy industry. We were talking about that earlier in this meeting. The planning grant program partnered up with localities, matched localities to fund a dairy feasibility study on bringing a dairy processor, cheese, yogurt, butter into Virginia, and that we wouldn't be able to do that without this planning grant program.
Well,
When's it going to
dairy
run?
support, yes.
Excuse me. When's that plant going to run?
Yes, exactly.
Our folks are working hard on it.
Madam Chair.
Delegate King?
Yeah, question to the Deputy Secretary. To your point about this is kind of an existing program, or at least that's the practice, and you just want to make sure you codify it, that's fine. But looking at lines 96 on, where this bill would require the Secretary to develop new guidelines for the program with certain criteria. Has that been done yet?
Those guidelines exist.
That
Yes, sir.
exists. So we're just basically telling you to do something you already did.
Yeah, yes, sir, just putting
So-
that in the code. In the same way that we have the guideline, yes, sir, for the same way we have the guidelines for the facilities program, we're codifying that, so we will formalize those guidelines related to the code.
So we really should pass the bill since you've already done the work. Okay, just want to clarify.
It's a good bill.
Thank you.
All right.
Any further questions?
For DLS, question for DLS. The title here, I've always thought it was referred to as agriculture, forestry, industrial something. This has got some new words on it. Is this changing the name of the fund, or is it staying the same?
You're referring to, Madam Chair, you're referring to line 24?
Well, anyway, everywhere in our discussions and written correspondence, it's been AFID.
I guess you're talking line 6.
So I think it would be in the title and, on line 90. I'm just trying to get the bill right and to have the right title for the bill.
All right, so you mentioned line 6 and then 90, is that what you said?
Yes. Is that a change to? This is an introduced bill. We already have this activity going. It has a name.
Madam Chair, I'm guessing that AFID is just the acronym, the short version, and the formal name always has been.
Always has been. Thank you.
I
That's
believe
my
so.
question.
The Governor's Agriculture and Forestry Industries Development Fund, that's safe.
I believe so.
Any more questions at the table? Is anyone in the audience here to support the bill? I think we've already heard from 2 or 2. Any more? Anyone here in the audience to oppose the bill? No?
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Second.
All right. We have a motion
Put her on the roll.
to report properly seconded. Are you ready to vote? Please record your votes on the electronic voting system. Clerk will close the roll. The bill is reported 8-0. Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of that.
And next is Delegate Lopez. There it is. He's going to talk about HB 1129.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh,
I have a amendment nature of substitute for the bill.
All right,
I think Mr. Meacham has it.
thank you.
Move
We
substitute.
have,
Second.
we have a motion to, accept the amendment in the nature of substitute, properly seconded. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, there we go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This bill has to deal with protecting firefighters and kids from chemical flame retardants. Unfortunately, flame retardants are one of the most common sources of toxic chemicals in our homes and our lives. It's originally designed to prevent fire in household products and clothing. These chemicals contained in upholstered furniture, carpeting, and children's products are now proven to be ineffective and unnecessary. Now, for example, chlorinated tris, a toxic flame retardant, was banned from children's pajamas in 1977. But that same chemical is now showing up in other equally dangerous illegal uses, including children's cribs, mattresses, and nursing pillows. These chemicals, as we discussed in the past, leach into body tissue. In fact, testing from the CDC has found that flame retardants in the bodies of more than the vast majority of Americans. Studies also show that children are at even greater risk. As a result, they can have 2 to 5 times higher levels of these chemicals than their parents. And once in their bodies, they do damage. Studies have linked these chemicals to a host of biological and neurophysical ailments, including endocrine disruption, decreased fertility, lower birth weights, and developmental and cognitive problems. I first found out about this issue, however, from firefighters in the firefighting community. These chemicals put firefighters at higher risk. When they go into a burning building, when they go to a burning home that has carpeting treated with these chemicals, upholstered furniture with these chemicals, these chemicals are able to get into their protective gear. For example, the risk of mesothelioma in firefighters is over twice that of the general population, while the risk of esophageal cancer is 62% higher. So as I said, the toxic smoke created by the burning of these chemicals can even penetrate their protective gear. To make matters worse, flame retardants added to polyurethane foam products have been shown to be ineffective in fire protection. So, if these flame retardant chemicals are ineffective, unnecessary, have been banned in the past, and are even harmful, why do we include them in our products today? Back in 1975, California adopted a flammability standard that required that these products resist an open flame. Manufacturers added these chemicals to comply with California's standard. But these policies were enacted before scientists were able to determine the effects of these chemicals on our health. In 2013, the California standard was changed so that added flame retardants were no longer necessary. Therefore, we no longer need to let California drive the safety of Virginia products. This legislation would prohibit the use of these toxic flame retardant chemicals in children's products and upholstered furniture in Virginia. Safer alternatives exist. They're being used by industry that will meet the fire standards, that will protect firefighters and our kids. Simply put, this bill will assure Virginians consumers that products sold in the Commonwealth are free of the worst of these chemicals to protect the health of both firefighters and our children. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Marshall, question?
So, Delegate Lopez, just
Delegate Marshall.
quickly trying to read between the difference between the substitute and the original bill.
Right.
So the original bill had provision of children age 12.
Right, so I can tell you that the amendment does 4 things that are different. Basically, it moves the oversight to the Virginia's Department of Health bedding and upholstered furniture program, and instead of the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. It also no longer creates the Virginia Product Safety Board and Safety Fund, because the fines that we had in the bill originally for manufacturing these products have been removed. It also removes the manufacturing of these products from the ban, so it only applies to the sale of products with these chemicals in the Commonwealth. And then also, the last thing is we had some language in there dealing with all-terrain vehicles and off-road motorcycles that we took out as well. Basically, we took that out because we want to make it very clear that this exemption clarifies the intent. Our intent is really to prevent the unintended consequences of these chemicals being used in the home.
Yeah, so that was, excuse me, my next question is line 33 and 34, that shall not apply to all-terrain vehicles. And so, why that carve-out?
Well, in the past, there was products in some major all-terrain vehicles that included these chemicals. and those cars and vehicles are not being used as much anymore. We wanted to really focus on the access to kids and the access to firefighters and what this might mean for firefighters going to a home or a building.
One more question. All right, so on line 31, it says that for the or by nonprofit organizations exempt from the
Exactly. Good. I mean, you have goodwill or various nonprofit organizations or schools that are unfortunately are receiving donated materials that might have been created in 1979.
Lots of questions, yeah.
Dr. Will, were you first?
I have no idea.
Go ahead.
Well, Cody's always first.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, Doug Lopez, is there any of these chemicals in existing like fire extinguishers, things that folks use at home to put out fires?
I don't believe so, but I would need someone to actually clarify that for me.
Dr. Lopez. Can you describe for us the federal situation? I think you said California has done this. The federal government is not. We would be the second state, or there are other states. What's
There are
state tie in?
Right. So I think we all understand that the SAMHSA process at the federal level with regard to the EPA is glacial, and that what happens a lot of the time is that as the CDC and other organizations and other private companies determine that some chemicals might be toxic or might have unintended consequences that we didn't expect in the 60s, the 50s, or the 70s. The process for federal government to move on these has been slow at times. I'd have to give you the exact number of states that have passed this, but the fact is that the academics and the studies that were done in California were sufficient to get them to reverse their policy. So I would hope that we would also follow the positions taken by other states and by the CDC. The CDC saying that these are chemicals that need to be taken out of the public sphere.
CDC.
The Center for Disease Control.
The CDC has stated these should be taken off the market.
I'd have to get that information for you, but they have said, the CDC has said, let me get the exact language here, that when describing what things like chlorinated tris and other chemicals on this list do, they leach into body tissue, fatty body tissue, and humans, and they found that these flame retardants have created neurophysical ailments. They have created a host of biological ailments that include things like endocrine disruption and decreased fertility, and they are problematic, especially for children. And so the problem here is that we want to make sure, I think what's the old adage from physicians announce that prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's important that if we know this is bad for kids, if we know this is bad for people who are exposed to it, these chemicals, why aren't we doing something to get rid of it now? And so, and the fact is that most manufacturers have already moved away from the production of these chemicals in products, including upholstered furniture, baby, and other products. We're just following where industry's already going.
Senator Marshall, have a question?
Yeah, on line 27, it says any manufacturer to Commonwealth. Is there a manufacturer to Commonwealth who manufactures this product?
I don't believe so. In my conversations with the Virginia Association of Manufacturers, however, they, and let me be, I don't see the representative here. Oh, there he is.
Hiding.
I don't want to speak for you, but I believe that you're opposed to, tell me if I'm wrong, that you're opposed to any kind of limitation whatsoever on the potential for a future manufacturer. Is that true?
Can I ask Brett a question?
Yeah.
Why don't you come forward, sir? Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chairman. I'm Brett Massey. I'm the CEO of Virginia Manufacturers Association. We do make products with flame retardants in it. We make foams. We make electronics. Electronics have to have some of these flame retardants in it. So that TV, we make the product that goes in that. We don't manufacture children's clothing anymore. That disappeared in the early days of that. So that's the area. The other thing that we don't have a clear handle on, we don't manufacture upholstery in Virginia anymore for furniture, but we do.
Upholstery cloth.
Upholstery cloth. We do manufacture the foam that the furniture upholstery is wrapped in. And that still does have to have TPP and some of the other chemical components in it that are legally allowed to be produced under FDA and EPA guidelines. Excuse me, not FDA, under EPA guidelines. So I don't want to represent that I'm a scientist here today. Usually when this bill comes up, we had enough time to bring our expert witness in from UVA, who is an expert in toxicity. And we didn't have that privilege today, so you're stuck with me. So I'll try to do my best to answer the chemical questions. I don't know all the answers, but I will certainly get back to you if I can.
Right. By extension, Madam Chair, along the same lines, we weren't able to bring some of the firefighters here who've spoken on this in the past, as well as the scientists on the other side who said that these are toxic chemicals. The fact is that even though it's allowed, and even though the EPA regs have not been updated, that the process for chemical registration and the coordination of the EPA, as I said before, as we all know, is glacial. And that the industry usually leads on this. And so the fact that California has already addressed this as it relates specifically to children's clothing, in terms of, and then also in terms of bedding and upholstery, and the fact that they're not doing this.
Upholstery as well, and
Yeah.
foam, including the foam.
No, they haven't done the foam, it's just the children's.
Just the upholstery.
No, it's just, I'm saying, it's just the children's clothing that they've taken off.
I thought you said upholstery as well.
No, I'm saying we should do that.
Delegate Marshall, then Delegate Hudson. Okay, Delegate Hudson?
Just a clarifying question as a matter of legislative style. It seems like the bill begins with an explicit prohibition for specific products for children and then ends with instructing the department, or the board rather, to the Board of Health to create regulations governing exposure to pregnant women. Is there a reason not to harmonize them?
That's just the way it is.
I think you're exactly right.
Yeah, they should.
And then it would be great if we harmonized it, but the drafting of it was such that.
Yeah. We don't like to name names, so,
So, I mean, you're educating me just about legislative process here as a first timer.
Typically, we put board regulations, or instructing someone to adopt regulations at the end, which is code style. And then we wanna have the specific prohibition that is not really subject to regulation right at the beginning, so that we know what the rules are.
Is there any value, excuse me, Madam Chair, follow-up question. Is there any value then in opening the door for the board to potentially regulate other products for children at the same time? So we have the explicit prohibition and then empowering the board to say there may be.
I would, just if I can speak to that, Madam Chair, I would hope that we would do this baby step first and then hopefully address that in the future.
Delegate. Poindexter, did you have a question, sir? Delegate King?
yeah, I had a question similar to that, which was, I wanted to get to the point. Just to be clear, this bill does not ban manufacturing.
No,
It
not at
only
all.
bans the sale of products that contain the product that may have been manufactured in Virginia. So to the extent that my friend Brett was referencing, your concern isn't because this bill would ban your manufacturer members from doing the business that they're in. It's just that you can't be certain where your members' end products may end up in, and therefore it's hard for you to control that chain of supply that all the way goes to the end of the commerce. And so you're just concerned that you may inadvertently be liable for something that you didn't think was illegal because you're not banning the manufacturing, but your product could end up in, is that how I should understand it?
Madam Chair, yes, that's one of the concerns.
Right, and so just, Madam Chair, if I can speak to that as well. So we narrowly tailored this, and if you look at line 10, 11, 12, we're not talking about the chemicals that are included in our iPhones. We're talking specifically about furniture, clothes, children's products, and bedding. And we've also addressed over the last couple of years with Brett and the Virginia Association of Manufacturers that we are not talking about manufacturing. We're simply talking about the sale in Virginia of furniture, clothes, children's products, and bedding, because of the facts that we know from the scientists at the Center for Disease Control and the facts that were brought up by folks in California and other research institutions, R1 universities around the country.
My confusion here is if the furniture has upholstery that is clear of these chemicals, but that cloth is wrapped around the foam that is not clear of these chemicals, then how can we say furniture? Am I wrong? So, do you understand what I'm saying?
Not particularly.
If we're saying we can't sell this kind of furniture, if there is no substitute, if the foam has these chemicals in it, what is the substitute? I have not heard that there is foam that is made without these chemicals.
You can make foam without these chemicals.
Oh, okay. I have delegate,
Yeah, sorry, just to follow up on my earlier question, partly answering Delegate Hudson's question, I think the way this is done is okay. If we were to ask the board to go further than the scope of this, prohibiting the sale of as opposed to prohibiting the manufacturing of, then I think that would be a policy decision if we were to go that far. And I would feel more comfortable as a policymaker to have to draft another bill in the future to ask the board to go with regulation, go beyond that. But if we were to ask the regulators to go forward even beyond what this scope does, then that would violate the intent of the legislation. So I wouldn't feel comfortable asking the board to go beyond what this bill does. But in that context, I wonder if this is a parliamentary question to our council. This bill started out as a Title III, which would have been agriculture. Now it's Title 32, which is health, and we're dealing with Board of Health. Assuming that we report this bill properly here, I wonder, and I don't mean to do any harm to the bill because I like the bill, I think it's a good bill. I wonder if this needs to go to HWI and or have the Board of Health be considered anyway, because I want them to do this. I'd like to see this bill become law, but I just don't feel comfortable as a member of Agriculture Committee to be telling the Board of Health what to do at this stage, given the changing posture of the bill.
Considering, Madam Chair, considering previous conversations I've had, I would not be opposed.
All right, what does our staff say?
Madam Chair, I think if we saw this bill and it started out in Title 32.1, we would probably ask that it be referred to health.
All right, is there any discussion on that point?
Can we do that? I think the, I think
full
the.
committee.
Full committee, yeah, so.
Okay.
But Madam Chair, we would have to get the Speaker's office permission for it to be a report and refer motion.
That will be a problem.
So what do we do?
Madam Chair, at the appropriate time after we hear from the town, I'll make a motion.
All right, so hold on a second, let's move right ahead. If you do decide. So then we would, if we do decide that this should be, re-referred to HWI, then what we would do is report it to full committee with the, with the request that it be re-referred.
No, I don't think we would report the bill.
Well, that's up to the committee, and the subcommittee, if the subcommittee wants to recommend reporting.
I guess we're in the weeds now, so, but,
That's next week.
if we
Weeds is
report
next
it,
week.
because it's gonna end up going to, HWI, and they're gonna have to hear it all over again.
Right, that's fine. I'm okay with that.
Can we refer
Is it,
it just
where's
back
the
to
bill
the
going
full
before?
committee?
Here.
Oh, that's, yeah. Tradition.
The tradition died here.
Okay, so I'm
I
told,
appreciate that. I'm gonna call you Marshall.
I'm told that if we take no action, then it can wind up in full committee and action can be taken there. Does that sound right?
Madam
No
Chair.
action.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think this is proper posture parliamentarily as well as trying to get to the right goal, which is this subcommittee, which has jurisdiction over the subject matter because it came to us as the right subject matter, took a look at it, and we made a decision that it might be better for this substance should be done in a different agency. But the substance of what the delegate wants as interim has been considered. And if we believe that the majority of this subcommittee believes this is good policy, I think it's proper for us to make a motion to report to the full committee. Once it goes to the full committee, then the chairman of the full committee can then decide at that point, does he consult with the speaker, with HWI, and then refer it there, let the speaker do that? But for our purposes of subcommittee, I think the only thing we have to worry about is whether we like the policy, and if so, we report it. If we don't like the policy, then we don't. And once it's in the full committee, I'll leave it to you as vice chair and the chairman of the committee to deal with the speaker and others. So I wouldn't worry about that part now, but the understanding is that the patron is okay if this bill were to ultimately end up in HWI, so that if it ends up on the floor in this shape, coming out of ag, we don't wanna create a parliamentary process at that time of a motion to refer.
Delegate Tyler, did you have?
I'm fine, we can continue.
Delegate Will?
Madam Chair, I mean, we didn't really hear a lot. We heard from one
No,
witness. I'd like to, if we're gonna take action, I'd like to hear some more folks in the position.
I totally agree with you. So, shall we go on, delegate, to finding out who supports the bill from the audience? All right, so anyone in the audience who is here to support the bill, we'd love to hear from you.
Support.
My name's Steve Carter Lovejoy. I'm with the Sierra Club, and Sierra Club supports this bill. I also, this has been discussed within the Legislative Committee of the Virginia Conservation Network, and they voted to support this bill as well.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else who support the bill? Here to speak in support of the bill? Okay. Anyone here to speak in opposition?
Kate Baker on behalf of Virginia Retail Federation, and we have historically opposed this bill as well. Our main concern is a sell-through provision for our retailers. We don't want them stuck with product that they can't sell, once this goes into effect.
And I guess my question for that is, so this is an effective date of July 2021.
Correct. But if they're still stuck, after July 2021, if they're still stuck with that product, they're eating that cost.
Does that imply that if it was another 6 months or so, you'd be fine with it?
If we can, I mean, we would have to take it back to our members, but if we have the ability to sell all of the product that we have that contains these chemicals, I would think that they would be okay with it.
All right, thank you. Anyone else want to speak in opposition?
Madam Chair, first I want to thank the delegate for attempting to make this bill better by not banning the manufacturing of anything, which is really, really important. But I do want to point out a couple things that really do need to be addressed no matter where it moves. I want to reiterate that all of these chemicals are federally regulated and allowed. They've all been tested for toxicity. There are federal standards for its use. And Madam Chair, you got at one of our complications right away, which is the formulation of foams, which are used in all types of products in the house, particularly those that may be for children or just used by children. We don't have control, but the foams inside the upholstered products, the furniture, that's it. So furniture is very, very difficult in this. Children's clothing, that's an easy one to fix, but the residential upholstered furniture, it's even more difficult than I'm describing as far as the wrap is now with, like for instance, Delegate Poindexter's automatic Lazy Boy that has all the electronics in it. All those electronics.
I can't unsee that.
I thought that would be good. Those electronics actually have our flame retardants, some of these in the electronics, so they don't catch fire. So it's not as easy as just listing and just saying all categories of furniture. It's still going to need some more work, and that's something that we're willing to work on. But I will just tell you point blank, this bill, I represent the Virginia Manufacturers Association, Virginia Chemistry Council, and American Chemistry Council. This enumeration of restrictions would be the most restrictive bill in the United States. So be very purposeful what you're doing. You would be affecting thousands of product categories, thousands of consumers, and you would have the most restrictive bill in the United States if you leave it as is. It does need more work.
I have a question for you, sir. I was told by Delegate Lopez that there is foam that is created operated without these flame retardant material, chemicals. Do you concur?
Most not. It can be, yes, that's true. But when it comes to residential furniture, we've saved 300,000 lives since product safety standards went in place in 1980 that use flame retardants. 300,000 lives, and we can document that. So there clearly is an issue as far as flame retardants working. We don't want to remove that, and some of that is a liability issue for manufacturers. So I don't see them eliminating flame retardants from furniture foams because of the ignition and flammability concerns where they've got to protect the consumer. I'm not versed enough on the children's market though. That's the part that our technical expert has, and I'm sorry, I don't have what they're doing in the children's market specifically, but I know that that is one area where there's been some change.
Thank you. Delegate Hudson?
I have a question. Are we to understand that the position of your association is that current federal regulations are sufficient to protect consumers from toxins? It's my understanding that the United States lags severely behind peer nations when it comes to protecting consumers and especially children from products that have been banned all over the world.
I would put our FDA, EPA, Consumer Product Safety Council against the Canadians and the Europeans any day of the week. We have by far one of the most extensive toxicity regulatory bodies in the world as far as regulating manufacturers, and that goes back to 1980. So I would fundamentally disagree with that statement. I think that, and I will tell you further, I work with these people my entire career. They get up every day thinking about how to make a better product, and if you think that there's any manufacturer that wants to manufacture a chemical or a piece of furniture that's going to put their consumers at risk, just think about product liability laws and think about class action lawsuits. If you don't believe us, just think about that reality. No one's going to do that. The risks are way too high. So yes, I think that they do an excellent job. It is slow though. I would absolutely agree with the delegate. It's slow, but it's slow because they're methodical. And the difference between exposure, you walk into a fire and there's smoke, and then you claim that you have been injured, versus toxicity, which is tested, validated, peer-reviewed studies, years and years of data and clinicals. That's the difference in why things take so long. It's like getting a drug. It takes a long time for toxicity studies to be done. And that's about the extent of my knowledge.
Thank you. Delegate Lopez, any further comment?
I would just echo what Delegate Hudson said in terms of the incredibly slow process that we have. I'd also say that it should not take, in some cases, 25, 40 years to get certain chemicals addressed appropriately by certain agencies. I would say that the European Union has done much more forward-thinking things, or forward-taking, more progressive significant steps forward in addressing some of the children's safety issues when it comes to chemical exposure than other countries have. I would agree with my friend Brett in that we have one of the most robust and exhaustive processes, but the nature of some of the agency interaction is very conservative and slow in how it moves forward. I'm saying that if we know from, I've said this twice now, we know from the CDC, we know from a significant amount of Research One universities that these chemicals have significant problems when it comes to neurophysical, when it comes to endoconstruction, when it comes to fetal anomalies, when it comes to any number of impacts that are specifically worse for children. Why would we not take action? And with this legislation, we have addressed the manufacturing issue. We have narrowed the products to only products that are going to be affected by, or that will be coming in close contact with kids, children's products, clothing, bedding. And so we're not talking about technology, we're not talking about your iPhone, we're talking about specific products that are going to be an issue for children and that, by extension, have become a significant problem for firefighters when they go into dangerous environments.
All right, thank you.
just being chaotic and not following a logical federal, state regulatory process, laws, and what we do, we have chaos, not just among the manufacturers here, but the hosts that produce products outside Virginia to send them in, whether they're overseas or here in Virginia. I have no problem with the intent of the bill. But for Virginia to be so far out in front, and only California, which often gets into trouble with some of this stuff, I'm uncomfortable with that.
Madam Chair, I think it is, I'll get back to Ellie Poindexter about the number of states. It's not-
I would love to hear that.
Yes, ma'am.
Are there other states?
I'll
that-
find out. I thought I had that list, I will have that for you.
Okay, but we don't have it now, and we have to do something now. Delegate Cole.
Madam Chair, I move to report to the full committee.
Second.
We have a motion to report the bill, HB 1129 to the full
With
committee.
the substitute.
Substitute.
With the substitute.
Madam Clerk,
It's-
comment required. Is the motion to report and refer, or just to report?
I thought, what did I hear, Delegate Cole? Did I not hear refer?
Report and refer.
Oh,
No, it's reported and then for.
Madam Chair, just a point of order. The motion, it was to report to the full committee with a substitute, and we seconded that. At that point, if we are back in the full committee, then the chairman can decide if he wants to work with the speaker to figure out a referral. But that is not something that we should have to think about now. I think for us, the only thing is for this subcommittee to report it back to the full committee, at which point
all right.
Chairman Plum can decide what to do.
So the motion is to report
The substitute.
the substitute to the full committee. It has been properly seconded. Are we ready to vote? Please record your vote on the electronic voting system. Clerk will close the roll. The bill fails, 4-4.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Elder. Next, we have Delegate Samira with HB 640. Delegate Samira.
Madam Chair, thank you for having us. Oops. Madam Chair, thanks for having me. Before us is a bill to make us safer, to make us healthier. And I come to you as a doctor speaking to it. This bill will ban the production, sale, and distribution of products containing bisphenol A chemical by July 2023 in the Commonwealth. There have been hundreds of studies conducted that prove that containers containing BPA cause birth defects, reproductive harm, and developmental harm. Thus far, 13 other states have passed bans on BPA, as well as several countries such as Canada, France, Belgium, and many more. Any manufacturer that fails to halt production of BPA products by said date would be penalized up to $5,000 for the first offense and up to $10,000 for the second offense. And any funds collected through these penalties will be put into a fund that will be created solely pertaining to Virginia's product safeties. So the research that is at hand is, number one, we have one from the Virginia Conservation Network, talking about how eliminating toxics to improve human health. Specifically on BPA, they say over the past decade, there have been concerns regarding the health effects of bisphenol A, a hardening chemical compound found in many plastic products. Studies have shown that BPA exposure is linked to accelerated puberty and increased risk of diabetes, cancer, and heart disease. The FDA has stated concern in regard to the effects BPA has on children's health and has acted to ban BPA in bottles and cups for children. You'll see in the packets I'm passing around the 2 FDA research summaries. I can point them out. I didn't highlight them, but on this one in particular, so this is Federal Register Volume 77, number 137. That's at the top, the identifier. In the top left, you'll find the part where it talks about indirect food additives, polymers, and in summary, the FDA is amending the food additive regulations to no longer provide for the use of polycarbonate PC resins in infant feeding bottles and spill-proof cups, including their closures and lids designed to help train babies and toddlers to drink from cups, sippy cups, because these uses have been abandoned. The action is in response to a petition filed by the American Chemistry Council. And on the other document from the FDA, in summary, on the bottom left corner, the Food and Drug Administration is amending the food additive regulations to no longer provide for the use of bisphenol A-based epoxy resins as coatings and packaging for infant formula because these uses have been abandoned. We are taking this action in response to a petition dated March 16, 2012. The idea here is, and I can go on with the research, it's all in front of us, and there are 3 other states that are introducing legislation right now as well, in addition to 12 that are 13 that have already banned, is that if it's banned for babies, it should be banned for adults as well. The effects are well understood to be impacting all age groups at different levels. The product itself that's being created, the plastic bottles that we see today actually are marketed as higher value when they have BPA and no BPA labels on top, so this is good for the industries in question. The industries already are exemplifying this standard as well. Most do not use, if not all, do not use BPA at this point, and we're simply making sure that that's not the case anymore in Virginia. I'm open to any questions.
Any questions for the delegate, Delegate Hudson?
First off, I want to thank Delegate Samira for introducing this bill in the absence of federal regulation. I think it's urgent that our states step up and take the leadership on issues like this. A friendly question, my understanding is that typically when bills like this have been introduced in other states, they specify tolerances for the level of the chemical. Should we be expecting to see something that says parts per billion? Does it make sense to ban unequivocally with no trace amount?
The slightest of traces have been found to cause some of the most severe problems. So at some points it's actually untraceable and just because there are small traces that it would cause the effects that were mentioned earlier. There's a lot of leaching that happens out, especially with high temperatures, which happens to be the case a lot of the times when these products are being transferred across areas. We definitely think that the trace levels would not matter much in this case.
Again, my question is less a matter of intent, follow-up question. It is less a matter of intent or the severity or the harm of the chemical, but just as a matter of legal enforcement. I would imagine that anytime you ban a substance, that you also have to specify the standard by which it would be found present. Is that?
Delegate Smith?
In the case of these other states, I don't think they had any specifications.
So, quick follow-up question. I was just hopping on the NC CSL website and looking at Textra in California and Maryland, and they had some similar, they had specified a numeric threshold.
Okay. And what was that, if you had noticed?
I closed the window, I was looking a little bit earlier. It just may be something to flag, if it were to, I would be very excited to report this up to the committee, but something that you might think about between now and then.
Are you suggesting an amendment?
And I think not in the moment, because I don't know what the appropriate text would be, but just I think typically when you regulate a substance, you specify a standard for it.
Okay. Sounds like Marshall.
So like the last bill, I guess my question is this properly before us? Is this an HWI bill? I don't know how this has got anything to do with
Yeah,
agriculture.
do we know how this will impact agriculture?
Yeah.
Madam Chair, EDAX does work with consumer products to some extent, and it is drafted to Title 3.2. I'll take a look and I'll let you know if I find things that are similar nearby in the code.
I'm sure it's like they're making our lives very hard today.
It may be because of BPA's leaching into waterways. I think that's typically how it gets regulated.
That's
a good answer.
Do you have any other, any
trying to get
further
try to send
questions
somewhere else.
for the delegate at the moment?
Madam Chair? Delegate, could you tell us what's happened in these 13 states?
As in with the industry or with?
With the
health
industry
outcomes?
and public acceptance of the replacement, what the replacements are and so forth?
You might see these stickers they put on, Madam Chair, health, the results are still being assessed. A lot of these standards have been newly put in place for first, to make a first point there. But the studies as to the negative impact, as I was mentioning, hundreds of studies have been identified, the very negative impacts on health of the divisions. So the study itself has done much research, and so we're trying to simply reverse the effects there.
So,
Madam Chair,
go ahead.
let me try to be a little more specific. In a state or states that have implemented the ban of BPA, what is the situation as regards to how water and milk and other foods are being packaged, distributed, consumed?
The standards have been changed, and so the companies are following the new rules, and they're not using BPA in their products, in their packaging. If that answers your question.
Delegate, so sort of associated with Delegate Poindexter's question, has this affected the whole recycling industry? What do we do?
I have not seen any points on that. We have experts in the audience that may be able to answer that question. You gotta put a stop point at some point, and when you do, then you're mixing obviously everything together. I don't think the recycling industry has reached the complexity that we're talking about here, where they can separate out BPA from non-BPA plastics. So I think that's a tough standard to set for the recycling industry in itself. But and the hope is that if we don't use BPA products anymore, then all our own recyclables eventually will get to the point where they don't.
But there's the interim where the companies who do use recycled materials are creating products with the BPA's from the recycled materials. So and who knows how long someone might go to the dump and fill the can with 10-year-old bottles and recycle them. So that would be very hard to regulate.
Sure, and then I'll say to that is that's an unsolvable problem. It's gonna, we have plastics that were created with BPA, and they exist, and we have more severe problems than just whether or not they have BPA. I mean, we don't even know how to recycle them right now. A lot of our there's a huge amount of problems in the recycling industry right now with plastics. So, you know, we either start at some point or we don't, is what ends up being the case.
Any further questions, comments here before we go to the audience? No? Okay. Anyone in the audience here to speak in support of this bill?
Steve Carter Lovejoy with the Sierra Club and also representing the Virginia Conservation Network. We support this bill. We think that this is, you know, a proven toxin to children. We think that if it's not good for children, then I'm not particularly excited about drinking it myself. The issue of the levels of toxicity, kind of, there are different approaches. There's another bill submitted that's actually that HWI is going to be considering dealing with PFOS, you know, and PFOAs. Those chemicals, that is looking at the amount of those chemicals that occur in our drinking water supply. And that's a different approach to limit or to establish a standard for a particular chemical. But in the case of BPA, we know where it's found and we know how to get rid of it by not having that particular kind of plastic. It is a particular kind of plastic, polycarbonate. You can recognize it. You know, the bottles we have on the table here are not made out of polycarbonate. You know, if you were recycling, you would know, or you could know, not to take this kind and to take that kind. But I don't think that that's really an issue here. I think the issue is there are lots of other alternatives for carrying our fluids than polycarbonate bottles. We know that BPA is a bad thing, and I think it makes sense to get rid of it.
Thank you, sir.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name is Danielle Sims. I represent the Virginia League of Conservation Voters. We support HB 640 because it gives the Commonwealth an important tool to protect public health against the harms of BPA and penalizes the manufacturing of this harmful and dangerous chemical. High exposure to BPA has been linked to a number of health problems, including infertility, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, impacts to brain development in infants, as well as cancer and asthma. Typical products that contain BPA include water bottles and baby bottles, which are currently banned, sealants and other devices, medical devices, eyeglass lenses, DVDs, CDs, household electronic items, and sports equipment. And BPA can also be found in epoxy resins that are used to coat the inside of food and drink cans.
Thank you. I think you just opened up 10 more cans of worms.
You don't eat those, though. You don't put those in your mouth.
That's why the bill's here, because of the worms.
Okay, Bill Johnson.
I might just offer one comment because for some reason it often takes politicians meeting someone face to face who has a problem. I am one of the thousands of 30-something women who suffers from one of the chronic illnesses we've discussed today because of the rising trend in these plastics to which we have exposed decades of children. You know, representation matters in public office. There are lots of people like me. And I just want to thank again one of the doctors who stepped up to advocate on behalf of us.
Do we have anyone else in the audience speaking in support of the bill? Anyone here to speak in opposition?
Madam Chair, Brett Massey again with the Manufacturers Association. Again, the same comment. We did not have an opportunity to bring our toxicity experts on BPA, but this one's a little easier than even flame retardants because there have been some flame retardants that have been phased out since the 70s. Let me correct the record, be really clear. BPA is not an illegal substance, number one. It is federally regulated, number two. And the largest longitudinal study completed its work last year, February of 2018. The U.S. National Toxicology Program released its Clarity Core study. And Dr. Stephen Ostroff, who is the Deputy Commissioner of the Food and Veterinary Medicine at the FDA, I'm going to give you just a short quote. His release said that our initial review supports our determination that currently authorized uses of BPA continue to be safe for consumers. That's the definitive statement of the FDA. Can it be toxic at high levels? Yes. Under this rationale, aspirin and honey, you would ban that today. because aspirin is actually toxic to children under a certain age, and so is honey. So that's not a reasonable rationale that toxicity at a certain level with a certain age group, you ban the entire product category. It has to have toxicology studies, it has to have age groups. Physicians, scientists know better than I, but the reality for us is BPA is used in everyday products every day. So your cans of vegetables, BPA resin's used to line it so there's no reaction between the food and the can, and it creates food safety. That's how you have that's why you can have shelf life of years now. When you spam. You know, when I was a kid, you didn't have a can that long because it had rust on the inside and then the food was contaminated. So BPA is being used in that way, it's being used in a number of things, but to the delegate's point, we voluntarily, in 2012, voluntarily removed BPA from sippy cups and from bottles. And the FDA passed a regulation eliminating that. That was a voluntary for the industry. And all these studies, like the one that just came out in 2018, the Japanese have done a study, the Canadians have done a study. There are responsible uses that are regulated levels. And to the previous speaker, I wish she lobbied for me. She listed all the things that I was going to say. It's an epoxy that's used in everything. It's a product that's used in everything, literally thousands of products. That shouldn't scare you because you probably didn't even know about it till today. It does save on the food safety issue. That's the issue, and the FDA has this definitive study. So we would be, again, this is according to our national association, if you pass this bill as is, it would be the most restrictive BPA bill in the United States.
Thank you, sir.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Ken Hutchison on behalf of the International Bottled Water Association, recently engaged on this matter, but as Mr. Vassie noted, the FDA has issued several studies, and he cited the most recent, but going all the way back to 2010, I'd like to just highlight a couple more statements that I think reflect a very long-term look at this issue. From 2010, studies employing standardized toxicity tests have thus far supported the safety of current low levels of human exposure to BPA. 2013, FDA's current assessment is that BPA is safe at the very low levels that occur in some foods. 2014, they revisited everything and said in December of 2014 that FDA experts across the agency specializing in toxicology, analytical chemistry, endocrinology, epidemiology, and other fields completed a 4-year review of more than 300 scientific studies. The FDA review has not found any information that it evaluated in these studies to prompt a revision of the FDA's safety assessment of BPA in food packaging at this time. Madam Chairman, members of the committee, we associate our comments with the Virginia Manufacturers Association, and I respectfully ask you all to oppose this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, subcommittee. My name is Susan Seward. I represent the Virginia Forest Products Association, and in effect, our concern is this bill would become a de facto ban on liquid packaging material produced with recycled content. You know, think of your Starbucks coffee cup, you know, produced with recycled content. We don't add BPA in the recycling stream producing food packaging, but if there's the zero tolerance, then in fact, we would lose the recyclability of those food packaging. So we would ask you to oppose the bill. Thanks.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, Kyle Shree with the Virginia Agribusiness Council. I just want to associate myself with the remarks just made by Ms. Seward and ask you to oppose the bill.
Thank you.
Hello, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Katie Hillibush representing the Virginia Forestry Association, and I'd like to align myself with the comments that Susan Seward made specifically about the use of recyclables in forest products. We definitely have concerns about the unintended consequences and other consequences of this legislation and the use of forest products that would affect the entire industry.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Parker Slabaugh. I represent the Virginia Food Industry Association. Our members are many of the grocery stores you see here in Virginia. We have 530 retail locations across the state. We are opposed to this bill and would like to align our position with many of the comments you've already heard today. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any further discussion?
If I may respond, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I just wanted to see if there were any more questions from our, okay, go ahead.
Sure. The FDA it's very difficult for the FDA to usually approve bans. It's extremely cumbersome. You just witnessed kind of a lot of the industries come forward and talk about it from their perspective. The fact that it was passed at the federal level as a ban on child products is a significant statement to us. FDA has a lot of concerns, but usually they don't rise to the point where they result in a ban in the form of a law, or I should say in the form of their regulations. There's countless studies. Many states have already passed it. Clearly, those states they're still surviving. Their manufacturing industries are still surviving. I don't think the issue would rise to the level where it would impact the industry so negatively. If anything, consumers are looking for products that don't have BPA in them. I personally bought my water bottle for the gym the other day, and I was looking for the sticker, and I paid an extra $3 for it. The reality is that it's good for business, it's good for the environment, it's good for safety, it's good for health, and we need to make sure that we stop the practices that are had right now in the industry that are negatively impacting people's lives, like Delia Hudson on this table. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Do I hear a motion?
Madam Chair, I move to report the bill to full committee.
Second.
All right, we have a motion to report, and it is properly seconded. Everyone will please record your votes on the electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll. And the bill fails to pass. It's tied at 4-4. Thank you, delegates. And now, our last bill of the day is Delegate Boyd, HB 1034.
Well, good. It was good afternoon, but now we're getting to the evening. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you. House Bill 1034 establishes the local food and farming infrastructure fund that directs the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services to establish a grant program for infrastructure and to support local food production and sustainable farming. There are a number of things that this touches on. There's some reasons what it does. So it helps farmers markets, what we call food hubs and processing facilities. Some of the main reasons why we want to be able to support our farmers, both in their production and distribution. And they're not just the production, but also sustainable farming in a number of different ways. Some of the reasons that have been outlined are it helps our local economy. We believe that a lot of the foods that come to us locally tend to be more nutritious. They certainly, we appreciate to have the relationship with our local farmers so they can tell us a little bit more about our food. As a millennial consumer, this is something that's very important to me and to my family. It is locally grown, so when it's locally grown, it tends to be picked when food is ripe or when the farmer believes that now is the time to harvest their crop. So it's more full of flavor. And then, of course, one big thing that we look for is we want to be able to support the local farmers because that means that our food is traveling less and it's better for our environment. With that, Madam Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for the delegate? I have a comment, which is that I started in my very hear from my farmers. For the audience who doesn't know, I represent parts of Loudoun, Clark, and Frederick counties. It's very, very agricultural. And we have lots of small farmers, and this is, you listed out all the stuff that, everything on their wish list. So, I love seeing this. I wanna know about the money.
Madam Chair, there's always room for chief co-patrons on this, as it proceeds. And, there's associated, budget amendment, as well, for the grant program.
To send in a
Yeah, so there's a budget amendment. Is it a language amendment or is it a dollar amendment?
There's a dollar amendment, to support this bill.
And the dollar amount is?
It's $500,000.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't omit that.
The question for you or for anyone else, is it then the practice of our committees to report bills that we support in principle and leave it up to the appropriations committee to decide if the funding is
That's how
appropriate?
it works.
Or
Yeah.
refer to pros.
We don't get to decide that, sadly. Delegate Poindexter?
Question. Was any funding in the introduced budget for the bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Delegate Poindexter, there was not.
I do have, go
Further
ahead.
thought, I'm thinking of the AFID that
Yes.
we've already
That was
discussed
gonna be my
today,
question,
and
too.
maybe if you could fill us in on how this would not compete or support each other.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Delegate Poindexter, great question. We've been working with the Secretary's office as well as VDACs to, their comments, this isn't an administration bill, as that this is certainly filling a void and is not meant to compete. And in fact, we'll be working with them throughout the session to see how we can further improve the intent here.
Back during the fall, when, I don't know who this idea came, did you go to the administration and try to get this funded in the budget?
Madam Chair, Delegate Marshall, no, unfortunately, I did not.
Any further questions at the table?
Just a comment, I think that this is, I represent a large rural area and certainly farmers markets are very needed in our particular area, especially because of our food deserts. So I do really support this particular endeavor.
Thank you, Delegate.
Sounds to me like he needs two Chico pitch responses.
Any more comments or questions from our table? If,
Madam Chair?
certainly.
On line 19, I have a question here about regional. Where I'm coming from is intrastate or, Dr. Tyler, you have a little land along North Carolina, I do too. We talked about going across the state line or, I don't understand what we're doing here. In other words, could food be coming from Carolina instead of Virginia at a Virginia farm market?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Delegate Poindexter. Got from right there's a Tar Heel in the middle of all this. What we have found practically is that our food travels upwards of 2,000 miles on average to get to us. Sometimes that does mean that we do bring a few foods from North Carolina or from West Virginia. But of course, what we want to be doing here as much as possible is bringing local foods to markets that people can access and doing everything that we can to, of course, make sure that we support local Virginia farmers.
No question.
Go ahead.
Delegate, so, okay, what you're trying to do here, you know I don't have a problem, but can this be done under the APIC program, especially in Cleveland, where both are?
Madam Chair, Delegate Poindexter, I have spoken with VDAX about can we create, are there room for collaboration? And we are very early in the session. We've had a couple of conversations, but because this has come rather quickly, I will assure you that I'm going to be doing everything that I can to work with VDAX to see if this is in fact complementary, if in fact it can integrate. To be honest with you, I would appreciate that if it could. But I want to defer to the department, to the secretary, to make sure that it's fully complementary to their wonderful efforts.
I'm guessing that we can hear that from VDAX in a little while. Delegate Marshall?
Madam Chair.
Delegate King?
Just on that point, if I recall from the earlier conversation on Delegate Guzman's bill, which would create the APHID or something like that. One of the concerns that was raised, and I had a little bit of hesitation as well, was that program, the governor would fund a local government, so that the local government can then decide how to spend the money. This one seems to go directly to the farmer. This funding goes directly to local farmers and others to encourage direct, sustainable sources. So it seems to me like the intent of the programs, I mean, it looks similar, but to the extent that the beneficiaries are slightly different. I kind of prefer this model because this, you're talking about creating farm markets and others in a way where there's got to be criteria created so that, you know, the VDAX will obviously have to come up with some criteria for who qualifies. But this seems to be more like a money that's going to go straight to the community as opposed to the other one being more local governments partnering with other organizations. So there might be room for both programs.
Delegate Will?
Madam Chair, I just wonder if the delegate might be open if we were to pass the bill by for the day, to give him time to talk to VDAX and see if they can come to, get further clarification. Me personally, I mean, I feel like it could be done through APHID grants, but I don't want to assume. I'm just,
Madam Chair, Delegate Will, thank you for that, I think, friendly question. What we are committed to do, obviously, there are many rounds here. We will have a full week between now and full committee, and should we have substitute language, then we will present that at full committee. But it gives us an opportunity to check this off the list.
Delegate, do you think there's help here, someone who might be able to help us with this question?
There are. I will.
Do we know?
Well, Madam Chair, so meeting with the director today at VDAX, we are currently talking, and they are going back and looking to see, is there ways to strengthen the spirit, of course, as again, this is not an administration bill, was very positive, very supportive, because this fills in a very important void. And should they see that there needs to be modifications, which there may not be, I said, you can bring me that language and we'll work on that as the process evolves. Otherwise, it'll continue and then, of course, on its way to appropriations.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions for the patron?
We need a motion for file for the week.
Well,
I'm sure, I make a motion. I move that we report this to the full committee. And given the conversation, obviously, we had a public conversation about some of our desires for the patron to continue to work with VDAX. And obviously, even if the full committee were to act favorably, it would end up in appropriations, in which case, we don't want to further delay this going to appropriations for them to have a conversation. So the sooner we can move from subcommittee, the further we can encourage all the players to get together. So in that spirit, I'd like to report this to full committee.
second. So we have a motion properly seconded to put this to full committee. Yes, I know, that's where I'm coming from. And we have other people in the room who made the trip, and I'm hoping to hear from them. Do we have?
Is there opposition?
Is that all right, Delegate?
Yes, ma'am, I just commented to appropriate time, but we're testimony.
All right, is there anyone here to speak in support of this bill? And I guess because it is getting late, and if we're all in agreement on things, then we can be brief.
Yes, we'll be brief, yes. So my name is Madeline Kelsey. I'm here on behalf of Food and Water Watch and the 30,000 constituents that we represent. And we would urge you to pass this bill. It's
Food and Water Watch.
Food and Water Watch, thank you.
All right, thank you.
And
Hello, my name is Rick Hood. I'm the owner of Elwood Thompson's Local Market here in Richmond. We've been in business for 30 years. We have 160 employees that embrace the local mission around food in our store. I'm also a founder of Real Local RVA that's been in existence for 6 years and has 118 members. Ever since Earl Butz, Secretary of Agriculture under President Nixon, told farmers to get big or get out, there's been a steady erosion of support from federal, state, and local governments for local farmers and farming. There's clearly an unequal playing field between local farming and big agriculture. Big agriculture today has numerous options to get support from governments by way of grants and subsidies. This makes local farmers less competitive. The results in the average income for a local farmer is negative income. The emotional results are devastating when the economics are so poor. The number of suicides per 100 for farmers is the highest of business sectors of our economy. What makes our community strong and unique are small local businesses. Small local farmers especially need help with distribution and marketing of their food products. The bill will help correct the inequality that exists. I ask you to vote for this excellent grant program regarding infrastructure for local food production and sustainable farming.
thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Lou Williams. I'm co-director of Green New Deal Virginia. We represent about 65 partner organizations, and when you add all their partners up, we're over, multi-thousands. We support this bill. I do have a statement from one of our local farmers who's part of our coalition. Local, state, and federal subsidies to big boxes and other large external corporations have dominated economic development, thinking and practice for nearly 40 years in Virginia, leading to the displacement of local businesses and the erosion of downtowns. Subsidies to outside corporations dwarf by hundreds of times the funds provided to existing local businesses and new entrepreneurs. So in that spirit, we urge you to keep this one up the food chain. Thank you.
Good afternoon, or I guess almost evening. Thank you, Delegate Rosen, for presenting this bill. My name is Beth Ferguson, and I'm the director of Real Local RVA. We are a membership organization based here in Richmond with 118 members, representing our local food system. So our membership includes farmers, value-added producers, restaurants, breweries, colleges, nonprofits, and distributors that all exist to support our local food system. We support sustainable agriculture and sustainable communities. And on behalf of our members, I just ask you to support this bill.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wish to speak in support? Is there anyone here to speak in opposition to this bill? All right.
Move to report.
Oh, wait, I think Delegate will have comment.
Yeah, Madam Chair, now two comments I'll say, and I do wanna, excuse me?
No, just one, just go ahead.
No, just so the patron understands, I'm gonna vote no, only to keep it on record calendar, okay? So not, but just wanna, so that's that. But also, in some of the comments that we heard, I'll ask my fellow legislators here to remember, we've heard about the perils that's been imposed on our farmers, especially our small farmers, but to remember that as we move forward through this session, as we deal with some other issues that are gonna be before us that can greatly impact our farming community. So I'm just asking, keep that in the back of your mind.
Thank you. All right, we had a motion to report, it was seconded, so I think that still stands. Please record your vote on the recording, electronic voting device, and clerk will close the roll. If we so want to say that, then. All right.
Chair.
The bill reports to the full committee at 6 to 2. Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you.